Mr. Ho, if you wake up and are Judge Ho, and I recognize that New York is a blue state, but imagine there is someone who considers himself or herself a conservative in the state of New York, who, God forbid, finds themselves in a courtroom where you're wearing a robe. What comfort do you think that litigant would have that you described the hatred of conservatives, the righteous indignation, the anger at conservatives as a tremendous source of power for you personally? How does that possibly give anyone comfort that you would be a fair and impartial judge?
A Biden judicial appointee told Senator Ted Cruz his fierce disdain for conservatives was delivered in church as a joke. Cruz possessed the complete transcript. It was definitely not a joke. The ensuing spectacle illustrates exactly what occurs when a self-proclaimed radical leftist who posted aggressive statements at 5 committee members attempts to persuade the Senate that he will be an objective and unbiased judge. Please subscribe and let us play the video.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In his first year in office, President Biden has made a pattern of nominating extreme partisans and radicals to serve in the administration, but especially to serve on the bench. And unfortunately, that pattern continues today. Mr. Ho, you will not be surprised that I want to address some questions to you. And in my view, your record reflects that same pattern of finding someone who has been an extreme partisan, who has been a radical, and President Biden trying to put judicial robes on that partisan and radical agenda. And I would note at the outset that that's not just my characterization. You yourself have described yourself as, quote, a wild-eyed leftist, and further as someone, quote, accused sometimes of seeing discrimination everywhere you look. Is that right?
Senator Cruz, I think the key word in that quote is accused. What I was doing...
Let's start with the first one, wild-eyed sort of leftist.
Well, again, Senator Cruz, I think I was characterizing how others have caricatured myself.
Okay. Well, let's take a quote you wrote in November 2017, and I found it amusing, the exchange a moment ago with one of the Democratic senators about, some older intemperate statements. I would note, just sitting here, this may be a first in that you have tweeted attacks at multiple members of this committee, including Senator Lee, Senator Cotton, Senator Blackburn, Senator Cornyn, and far from being intemperate statements when you were a teenager, and most of these tweets occurred last year. So in the last 12 months, you have engaged, or the last about 18 months, you have engaged in partisan attacks on multiple members of this committee. But you also wrote in November 2017, quote, in these dark times, I've been fortunate to find tremendous sense of purpose in my work as a civil rights lawyer. But as a colleague of mine asked me over lunch recently, Dale, do you do this because you want to help people or because you hate conservatives? What he was getting at is that anger can, in fact, be a tremendous source of power. For me, righteous indignation can provide a sense of moral clarity and motivate the long hours needed to get the work done. But it's only a short-term burst. It's not sustaining in the long run. Mr. Ho, if you wake up and are Judge Ho, and I recognize that New York is a blue state, but imagine there is someone who considers himself or herself a conservative in the state of New York, who, God forbid, finds themselves in a courtroom where you're wearing a robe. What comfort do you think that litigant would have that you described the hatred of conservatives, the righteous indignation, the anger at conservatives as a tremendous source of power for you personally? How does that possibly give anyone comfort that you would be a fair and impartial judge?
Thank you, Senator Cruz, for giving me an opportunity to address this. As I mentioned to some other members of the committee, this was a comment that I made in church where I was relaying a joke that someone else had told, the point of which was that that kind of temporary sugar rush from being angry at someone, while it can feel powerful in a moment, it's not the kind of thing that is sustaining for a human being in the long run. That at the end of the day, if you want to do good work in the world, it has to come from a different place, a place of love for your fellow person. And that's what I was trying to convey to my fellow congregants at my church.
Well, that's not what you said. And what you said is you described hatred and righteous indignation directed at conservatives. And I would note that that's a pattern that also continues. You know, a minute ago you talked about how you're dedicated to equality. And I will say, looking at your record, that is not in fact the case. Your record instead is a partisan view. So, for example, you are a graduate of the Yale Law School. The Yale Law School has an open policy of discriminating against Asian Americans. One of the first things that Joe Biden's Justice Department did was dismiss the investigation against Yale because today's Democratic Party believes discriminating against Asian Americans in admissions is an acceptable form of bigotry. Do you agree with the Biden administration on that?
Senator Cruz, I haven't followed the ins and outs of what the Biden administration has done with respect to that particular matter. What I can tell you,
do you agree with your alma mater's policy of discriminating against Asian Americans in admissions?
Well, Senator Cruz, I'm a member of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. I try to do what I can in the Asian American legal community. I'm not aware of a particular policy of discrimination in admissions at Yale Law School. But I think to your larger question, Senator Cruz, I clerked for judges who were appointed by executives of different parties. They set an example for me that politics, you can have political views, but they don't have a role on the bench. And I would look to follow their examples.
Well, your record suggests precisely the contrary.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, and thank you to all of today's nominees for your willingness to serve, for your records of service, and to your families for their support of your nominations here today. With your forgiveness, I hope, I'm going to focus specifically on the nominee to be the head of the Patent and Trademark Office. You've had a number of questions from my colleagues. I'm going to briefly address two or three things. There's lots of other issues I could take up, but I know that
This is the reality that mainstream news outlets refuse to cover regarding Cruz arriving at the hearing armed with Dale Ho's exact statements, ignoring misquotes and summaries in favor of his verified publications, digital posts, and religious addresses, which he recited sequentially until the nominee was completely cornered. Starting with the radical progressive confession, Cruz highlighted that Ho previously characterized himself as a fanatical leftist, and as an individual constantly charged with spotting prejudice in every situation. The nominee attempted to argue that he was merely recounting the exaggerated ways in which critics had portrayed his character. Cruz then presented the literal transcript, proving Ho embraced that exact identity using his own terminology, rather than referencing a mocking depiction. Moving to the second point regarding panel hostilities, Cruz exposed a potentially unparalleled occurrence in judicial confirmation history where, within the year and a half preceding his evaluation, Ho posted highly partisan criticisms targeting 5 active members of the exact committee deciding his fate, including Senators Lee, Cotton, Blackburn, and Cornyn. Cruz observed that Democratic colleagues had only recently concluded their questioning regarding the nominee's inflammatory remarks from earlier in his career. These particular political strikes were absolutely not ancient history, as they actually originated from just the previous calendar year. Addressing the third issue concerning the cited disdain for conservatives, a November 2017 article detailed Ho's drive as a civil liberties attorney, where he recalled a peer questioning if his career choice stemmed from a desire to assist citizens or a deep resentment toward right-wing individuals. Ho claimed his reply was that outrage functions like a fleeting burst of energy and that genuine dedication has to be rooted in compassion. Cruz forcefully interjected that this was unequivocally false, emphasizing that the nominee specifically detailed intense aversion and self-righteous anger aimed directly at conservatives as an empowering force, which constitutes a documented declaration of internal drive rather than a humorous remark. For the fourth matter regarding bias at Yale against Asian Americans, Cruz established that Ho received his degree from Yale Law School, an institution with a well-known strategy of marginalizing Asian American applicants, and highlighted that the incoming administration's Justice Department immediately dropped the inquiry into those biased practices. Cruz directly inquired whether the nominees supported this contentious admissions framework. Ho responded by claiming total ignorance regarding any specific prejudiced protocols taking place at his alma mater. Cruz countered by emphasizing that the nominee holds a membership in the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, yet inexplicably claimed to have missed a monumental institutional bias scandal that captured massive nationwide headlines. Cruz delivered his final judgment by stating the nominee's historical record completely contradicts his current testimony to the panel, presenting a self-proclaimed radical progressive who launched digital assaults against 5 deciding senators, cited his contempt for conservatives as an empowering mechanism, and completed his education at a university actively marginalizing his own demographic while feigning ignorance, leaving viewers to decide if such an individual deserves a permanent judicial position in New York. So please like, subscribe, and share.